Danny Voss did not lose Harbor Street. He lost his grip on the version of himself that the show demanded he stay inside of. For 11 seasons, he played the loudest, dumbest, most lovable father on network television, and the world laughed along with every pratfall. Then, at a 25th anniversary reunion special that was supposed to be nostalgia and applause, Danny said something into a live microphone that no publicist had cleared, no producer had scripted, and no fan had ever expected to hear. He looked at his former co-star Ronnie Pratt, the man who had played his best friend for over a decade, and he told the truth. The room went silent. The clip went everywhere within the hour. Long before any of this, Danny Voss grew up in a small manufacturing town in Ohio where nobody in his family had ever worked in entertainment. His father ran a hardware store that had been in the family for 2 generations, and his mother taught elementary school music, which is where Danny first got on a stage at all, singing in a 4th-grade holiday concert he later described as the only time as a kid he ever felt like people were actually watching him and not just tolerating him. He was a middle child in a house full of louder personalities, and being funny, he has said in later interviews, was the only reliable way he found to get noticed at the dinner table. He did not study acting formally until college, where he stumbled into a theater elective to fill a schedule gap and ended up staying in the program for reasons he still cannot fully explain. His professors pushed him toward drama, not comedy, insisting that his instincts for stillness and restraint were rarer and more valuable than his ability to get a laugh. He spent his 20s doing exactly that kind of work, playing wounded, complicated men in small regional productions that paid almost nothing and reached almost nobody, but that shaped how he thought about performance. By his own account, he never once considered himself a comedic actor until the Harbor Street audition forced the label onto him. Ronnie Pratt's path could not have looked more different on paper. He came from a family already loosely connected to the entertainment industry, with an uncle who had worked as a studio grip for decades and a mother who did background extra work throughout Ronnie's childhood. He grew up around sets in a way Danny never did, understood the unwritten social rules of a soundstage before he ever had a line to deliver, and moved through early auditions with a comfort that read, to casting directors, as natural talent rather than institutional familiarity. Whether that comfort actually reflected greater skill or simply greater exposure is a question that would quietly shape how the industry treated both men for years afterward. Before Harbor Street became one of the defining sitcoms of its era, Danny Voss was a journeyman actor working regional theater in the Midwest, taking whatever paid the rent, and privately wondering if he had missed his window. He was in his early 30s when he auditioned for the role of Walt Ferris, a blue-collar dock foreman with a big mouth and a bigger heart, and he almost did not get called back. The casting director thought he was too soft for the part. It was Ronnie Pratt, already attached to play Walt's best friend and co-worker Skip Malone, who reportedly pushed for Danny to get a second read. That detail matters, because it means the entire foundation of the show's chemistry was built on one favor, one moment of one actor believing in another before the audience ever had a chance to. Once the show launched, it became clear the network had lightning in a bottle. Walt and Skip were the emotional center of Harbor Street, 2 dockworkers who bickered like brothers, covered for each other's mistakes, and delivered the kind of physical comedy that made studio audiences lose control. Danny brought the volume. Ronnie brought the timing. Together they became one of the most quoted duos in sitcom history, the kind of pairing where fans genuinely believed the friendship on screen had to be real, because nobody could fake that rhythm for 11 years. Off camera, for a long time, it seemed like it was real. There are decades of convention photos, talk show appearances, and joint interviews where Danny and Ronnie finish each other's sentences, needle each other affectionately, and talk about their families like they are actually intertwined. Ronnie was best man at Danny's second wedding. Danny gave a toast at Ronnie's 50th birthday party that fans still circulate clips of online, calling it one of the most genuine tributes one performer has ever given another in public. That is the version of the story most people carried into the reunion special. That is exactly why what happened on stage landed like a demolition. To understand why Danny's outburst mattered, you have to understand what The Funny One costs a performer over 11 seasons. Danny Voss did not simply play a loud, foolish father figure. He became him in the eyes of casting directors, studio executives, and eventually the audience itself. Every pilot season after Harbor Street ended, Danny found himself being offered nearly identical roles. The blustering dad, the well-meaning idiot, the man who exists to be laughed at rather than laughed with. He took several of those roles because the alternative was unemployment, and each one further cemented the box he had been placed inside. What almost nobody outside his inner circle knew was that Danny had trained for years in dramatic theater before Harbor Street ever cast him. He had played Willie Loman in a regional production of Death of a Salesman that critics praised for its restraint and devastation. He had understudied serious roles in Chicago before the sitcom offer arrived and changed the entire trajectory of his career. Comedy was something he was good at. Drama was something he had trained for. The show gave him fame, but it also quietly buried the actor he had spent a decade becoming. Ronnie Pratt's career moved in almost the opposite direction. Where Danny got typecast as the fool, Ronnie was consistently framed by the press and by the show's producers as the smarter half of the duo, the straight man, the one holding the whole partnership together. Magazine profiles during the show's run repeatedly described Ronnie as the real talent behind the pairing, the one whose subtler choices made Danny's big swings land. Whether or not that framing was fair, it shaped how the industry treated both men once the show ended. Ronnie moved smoothly into producing. He got development deals. He got offered dramatic guest roles that never came Danny's way. Danny watched his former best friend's career expand in directions his own never could, and for years, by every public account, he said nothing about it. Looking back, there were signs. A journalist who covered entertainment for over a decade noted that Danny had grown noticeably shorter in interviews whenever Ronnie's name came up in the years after the show ended, offering clipped answers where he once would have gushed. At a smaller fan convention 2 years before the reunion, an attendee recorded Danny giving an answer about creative differences behind the scenes that he immediately walked back, laughing it off as a joke about scheduling conflicts. At the time, nobody thought much of it. In hindsight, it reads like a man testing how much truth he could let slip before catching himself. The truth, according to people who worked adjacent to the production over the years, was more complicated than a simple falling out. It was not that Ronnie had done one dramatic, obvious thing to Danny. It was smaller and more corrosive than that. It was years of subtle credit-taking in writers' room pitches. It was Ronnie quietly campaigning for extra lines during table reads that shifted punchlines away from Walt and onto Skip. It was Ronnie's name appearing as a producer on later seasons, while Danny's contributions to storylines he had originated went uncredited. None of it, on its own, was a scandal. All of it together, over 11 years, was a slow erosion of a friendship that looked, from the outside, unbreakable. Danny reportedly raised some of this privately with the show's original creator during the 9th season, only to be told that Ronnie's added producing credit was a business matter, not a friendship matter, a distinction Danny apparently did not accept even if he stopped pushing it. He kept working. He kept smiling for the cameras. He kept doing joint press with Ronnie because that is what the contract, the brand, and the fans all expected of him. The performance of friendship became, in its own way, just another role he had to play. The 25th anniversary reunion special was originally pitched as an easy win for everyone involved. The streaming platform that now owned the Harbor Street library wanted a nostalgia event to drive subscriptions. The surviving cast members, including Danny and Ronnie, were offered a significant payday to sit on a soundstage recreation of the Ferris living room, watch clips, tell behind-the-scenes stories, and let a new generation discover the show through clip compilations built for social media. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be warm. For the first 90 minutes of taping, it was exactly that. Then came the segment the producers had built around the Walton-Skip friendship specifically, complete with a highlight reel of the two characters' biggest moments set to swelling music. The host, an industry veteran known for warm, softball-style reunion interviews, turned to Danny and asked what he thought made the on-screen friendship so believable for so long. It was meant to be a lob, an easy setup for a heartfelt answer about brotherhood and chemistry. Danny reportedly paused for several seconds, long enough that the studio audience later described feeling the temperature of the room change before he said a single word. What Danny said next, according to the full unedited footage that later leaked online despite the platform's attempt to control the narrative, was that the friendship viewers saw on screen was written a lot better than it was lived. He said it evenly, almost gently, which somehow made it land harder than if he had shouted it. The host tried to laugh it off as a joke. Danny did not laugh. He kept going, saying that he had spent over a decade watching someone he considered a brother take credit, take lines, and take opportunities while smiling for the same cameras Danny was smiling for, and that he was tired of pretending the smile had always been real. Ronnie, sitting only a few feet away, reportedly went pale on camera before attempting to respond. He said something about not knowing where this was coming from, about being blindsided, about how much their friendship had meant to him. Danny's reply, the line that the internet would clip, caption, and replay for the next several weeks, was short. He said that a friendship you have to keep reminding people about on camera might not be the friendship you think it is. The studio audience did not laugh, did not applaud, and by several accounts did not fully understand what they had just witnessed until clips of it were already spreading online less than an hour later. In the days that followed, the Harbor Street fan community, which had spent 25 years being one of the more unified and good-natured corners of sitcom fandom, split almost evenly into two camps. One side argued that Danny had every right to finally say what he had apparently swallowed for over a decade, pointing to the pattern of uncredited pitches and producer credits as evidence that something real and unfair had happened behind the scenes. The other side argued that Ronnie deserved the benefit of the doubt, noting that public perception of who was the talent behind the duo had been shaped largely by press coverage and marketing decisions neither actor fully controlled, and that it was unfair to retroactively cast Ronnie as a villain based on choices the industry, not Ronnie himself, had made. Long threads compiling old interview clips began circulating, with viewers rewatching decades-old convention panels searching for confirmation of whichever side they had already picked. Some pointed to a panel from over 15 years earlier where Ronnie jokingly referred to himself as the actual actor of the two of us, while Danny laughed along, now recontextualized by some viewers as an early, uncomfortable data point rather than harmless ribbing. Others pointed to interviews where Danny effusively praised Ronnie's generosity as evidence that whatever tension existed later had not always been present, or had at least been more complicated than a simple story of one man wronging another. Entertainment journalists who had covered the original run of Harbor Street found themselves fielding requests to weigh in, and several admitted publicly that they had sensed something was privately strained between the two men for years but had never had anything concrete enough to report on. That admission became its own small controversy, with some readers accusing the entertainment press of protecting a comfortable narrative rather than digging into a friendship that, in hindsight, had shown cracks for a long time. Within a day, the moment had been dissected from every possible angle. Fans who had grown up on Harbor Street felt as though a piece of their childhood had been quietly rewritten in real time. Entertainment commentators debated whether Danny's comments were a long overdue reckoning or an unfair ambush of a man who had no chance to prepare a defense. Clip accounts stitched together old convention footage next to the reunion moment, pointing out every subtle shift in Danny's body language across the years that suddenly, in retrospect, looked like restraint finally running out. What made the moment resonate beyond typical celebrity drama was how relatable the underlying dynamic felt, even to people who had never worked in entertainment. Everyone has experienced some version of watching a colleague or a friend get credit for shared work. Everyone has smiled through a relationship that quietly stopped being equal long before anyone admitted it out loud. Danny's outburst was not really about a sitcom. It was about the particular exhaustion of performing loyalty long after the loyalty had been spent, and that feeling translated far outside the world of network television reunions. Ronnie's team released a statement within 48 hours expressing that he was saddened and surprised by Danny's comments and that he still considered Danny family. Danny did not immediately respond to that statement, and when he eventually did address the moment in a follow-up interview weeks later, he did not walk anything back. He said he regretted the venue more than the substance, that he wished he had said it to Ronnie privately years earlier instead of letting it surface on a stage built for nostalgia. He said the words had been sitting in him for over a decade, and once the door cracked open even slightly, there was no closing it again. The other actors who had built careers around Harbor Street found themselves in an impossible position almost overnight. The woman who had played Walt's wife for the show's entire run, an actress who had remained close with both men over the years, was reportedly seated only a few feet from the confrontation and later described the experience as watching a marriage end in real time on a show she thought was about celebrating the past. She did not take a public side in the weeks that followed, telling one interviewer that she had spent decades hearing both versions of the story privately and did not think it was her place to declare a winner in front of an audience that had not lived through any of it with them. Other performers from the show's supporting cast were less careful. One actor who had played a recurring neighbor character posted, then quickly deleted, a message suggesting he had seen this coming for years, a comment that only added fuel to speculation about how widely known the tension behind the friendship actually was among people who had worked on set. A former writer's assistant, speaking anonymously to an entertainment outlet, claimed that producers in the show's later seasons had developed an unspoken rule about never scheduling Danny and Ronnie for solo scenes together without a third party present, a detail that, if true, suggested the strain had been visible on the ground long before any audience noticed anything on screen. The show's original creator, now retired from the industry for several years, released a brief statement expressing sadness that Two Men I Love became something the internet gets to pick apart, without commenting on which account of events he believed. People close to the production noted that his statement was carefully worded to avoid validating either man's version of the story, which some interpreted as diplomacy and others interpreted as its own kind of confirmation that there had always been more happening behind the scenes than the creator had ever wanted to manage publicly. What almost none of the viral clips captured, because they were cut for length and impact, was what happened in the minutes immediately after Danny's comments, once the host attempted to steer the taping back towards safer territory. According to 2 crew members present that day, the recording did not simply move on. There was a visible, uncomfortable stretch where neither man spoke, where the host visibly searched for a way to transition, and where Ronnie eventually asked, quietly enough that it barely registered on the boom mic, whether they could take a short break before continuing. During that break, according to one crew member's account that later circulated online, the 2 men did not shout at each other backstage the way many assumed they must have. Instead, they reportedly sat in near silence in adjoining chairs for several minutes, neither looking at the other, until Ronnie finally asked how long Danny had been carrying that. Danny's answer, relayed secondhand and never confirmed by either man directly, was simply, longer than you'd want to know. Whether that exchange happened exactly as described or has been shaped by retelling, it captures something that the viral 90-second clip could not. 2 men who had spent half their lives performing a friendship for cameras, suddenly forced to sit with whatever was left of the real one, with no script and no laugh track to guide them through it. The special aired anyway, weeks later, with the confrontation intact and only minimal editing, a decision the streaming platform defended by pointing out that removing the moment entirely would have meant discarding nearly the entire second half of the taping. Whether that decision was made out of journalistic honesty or simple recognition that the moment would drive more attention than any nostalgia reel ever could remains a matter of debate among people who worked on the special. The deeper story underneath the viral moment is about what long-running television actually asks of the people inside it. For 11 years, Danny Voss and Ronnie Pratt were contractually, financially, and publicly bound to maintain the illusion of a friendship for an audience that needed to believe in it. Real resentments, if they existed, had nowhere sanctioned to go. There was no version of the show, no version of the press tour, no version of the merchandise campaign that had room for 2 lead actors admitting they had drifted apart or grown resentful of each other. The business model depended on the myth staying intact. That is the part of the story people rarely think about when they watch beloved on-screen duos do decades of joint interviews and convention appearances. The audience wants consistency. The industry wants a marketable narrative. The actors are the ones left absorbing whatever gap exists between the performance and the reality, sometimes for years, sometimes for their entire careers. Danny's reunion moment was not simply him losing his temper. It was the release valve on a pressure system that had been building since roughly the 9th season of the show, one slight, one uncredited pitch, one production meeting at a time. Whether Ronnie's account of the friendship or Danny's account is more accurate may never be fully settled in public, and it likely does not need to be. What the moment exposed, regardless of whose version is more complete, is how fragile even the most beloved on-screen partnerships can be once the cameras stop needing them to perform belonging. Danny Voss spent 11 years being the funny one and a quarter-century after that pretending the friendship behind it had survived intact. At the reunion, he finally stopped pretending, and an entire audience that thought they knew exactly who these 2 men were to each other had to sit with the uncomfortable possibility that they never really did. In the months since, neither man has fully closed the door on reconciliation, and neither has fully opened it either. Danny has said in later interviews that he still hopes he and Ronnie can eventually talk without cameras, producers, or an anniversary special dictating the terms of the conversation, though he has stopped short of saying he expects that to happen soon. Ronnie, for his part, has largely avoided the subject in public appearances since, telling one host that some things are better worked through privately than relitigated for an audience, a comment some read as maturity and others read as an unwillingness to publicly reckon with anything Danny said. What both men seem to agree on, even if they agree on little else about what actually happened between them, is that whatever the friendship had become by the time cameras were rolling on that stage, it was no longer the thing either of them had signed up to perform. The Ferris living room set has since been dismantled and sold off in pieces to collectors, which feels, in its own way, like the most honest ending a story like this could have gotten. The place where the friendship was built for television no longer exists. What is left is just 2 men, considerably older than the characters they used to play, trying to figure out privately what, if anything, can still be salvaged from a bond the world was never entitled to in the first place. So what do you think? Was Danny right to finally say what he had clearly been holding on to for years, or should he have kept that conversation private instead of having it in front of millions of people? Drop your thoughts in the comments, And if you want more stories about what really happens behind the friendships television convinces us are real, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one.